Hi everyone. So today's session is curriculum design and it's learning outcome 2 that we'll be doing. My name is Shazia Khan and thank you for attending today's session. So the first learning outcome we went through was learning outcome 1. So I'm just going to give you a recap of what we've done in that learning outcome. So you've got an understanding of what we've done in the first learning outcome. So the learning outcome 1 was to understand approaches to curriculum design and development. We looked at the social, political, and economic context of education and training. We looked at contemporary issues and also looked at elements of professionalism, dual professionalism. We went into looking at the purpose of the curriculum design and why there was a need to put a curriculum design in place. So we looked at the process. We looked at analysing the purpose of the curriculum design and also looked at what that involves in regards to curriculum design. We then went on to look at different things like meeting diverse needs, supporting effective teaching, and promoting critical thinking and problem solving. We then went on to look at elements of a curriculum design in regards to identifying different types of curriculum design and making sure that we looked at the different approaches and the models and of curriculum design and development used. So we looked at models such as Tyler, rational linear models and the importance of that models and what the strengths and weakness were of that model. We then went on to look at the TABA model, which was the teacher as a designer model, and that was followed on from Tyler's model by Hilda Tabba, and it was in regards to her model in regards to identifying steps to develop a successful curriculum. We looked at the constructivist approach and why that was so important. We then went on to look at the backward design by Wiggins and McTighe and looked at the element of why that was important when designing a curriculum. We looked at competency-based education and also looked at elements of the importance of learner feedback when developing curriculum and why that's important, and looked at evaluating teaching methods and also looked at elements of feedback and why that's so important within a curriculum, why there's a need to have feedback within a curriculum. We then went on to look at elements of the issue around if there's any issues around risk management and looked at that. So in regards to learning outcome, we looked at student surveys, feedback, teacher self-assessment, reflection. We also went on to look at peer review and collaboration, longitude studies and research and why they were important. So we looked at the elements of, putting together a curriculum at the start of it. Now we're going to be able to develop a curriculum in learning outcome 2. So the indicative content we'll be looking at in learning outcome 2. So we'll look at the evolution and development of inclusive learning, technologies to enable inclusive learning. We'll look at theories and models of communication, application of theories and models of behavior management. Also look at teaching and learning, meeting regularity, legal and awarding organization requirements, theories and models of behavior, and management as this relates to individuals and groups. We looked at theories of learning and their applications, application of learning theories to teaching and learning, and application of theories and models of communication, education to education and training. The key terminology that we'll be looking at is how to develop a curriculum. So what is the process and what steps need to be taken to putting together a good curriculum. So we look at steps like needs assessment, the planning session, the development, content development, what content needs to be included, the pilot delivery, looking at the revision and the completed curriculum package. There has to be steps that we need to take to make sure that the curriculum package that we put together is successful and make sure that, that everyone understands the purpose of the curriculum and what the planning needs are in place. So we'll go on to 2.1, and that is to identify learning objectives and outcomes required for curriculum design. So why there's a need to have these learning outcomes in place, and understand the purpose of a curriculum. So learning outcomes explain what students should be able to achieve by the end of the course. This may be changes in their knowledge, skills, attitude and behaviours. And this is the first element to improve the course design and look at the assessment curriculum to see whether there's a clear framework for curriculum development. So we're going to look at different steps. So the first one is to understand the purpose of the curriculum. So begin by understanding the purpose. So what are the needs of the learners? You know, it's the most important thing to identify what the needs of the learners are. That needs to be taken into consideration when putting a curriculum together. You know, why there's a need to have the curriculum in place. What are the objectives at the end of the curriculum? What are the goals and what you want to achieve with the learners? So they are the main things that need to be put in place. Conduct a needs assessment. So, you know, identify the skills, competence that students need to acquire. You know, make sure that the requirements of subject matter are the same level of the student. Make sure you are considering what their needs are rather than considering the needs of yourself, because that's the people you are designing the curriculum for. Secondly, define learning objectives. So again, look at the SMART objectives. Are they specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound? You know, what should the students be doing after completing the curriculum? For example, you know, students need to write an essay after doing the curriculum, or students need to analyse data at the end of the curriculum. So you need to define your learning objectives, because it's really important when you're designing a curriculum to identify the learning objectives at the start, so you are able to achieve them learning objectives. Align with educational standards, so ensure the curriculum aligns with any sort of educational standards. Make sure that, you know, when you have put a curriculum together, make sure they are, you know, it is in line with the specific requirements of the awarding body, or, you know, the standards that have to be met. Consider Bloom's taxonomy, and that is really important in SEL, to consider Bloom's taxonomy. What you need to identify, how long it needs to take you to utilize the learning objectives. Make sure you are creating the assessments in line with the standards. Make sure you are identifying what the objectives are, and you are using the wording around Bloom's taxonomy, because that's really important when it comes to identifying any sort of elements of the taxonomy. Incorporate assessments evaluation methods. So make sure you have a variety of different methods, not just assignments or exams. Make sure you have a variety, such as maybe projects, role plays, quizzes, presentations, you know, to measure the learning. It needs to be really, really important. Ensure progression and sequencing. So organize the learning objectives in a logical sequence, ensuring that they build on each other. So start with foundational concepts towards more advanced concepts and knowledge. Consider diverse learning styles. So make sure that you are considering learning styles, because you have got a different variety of diverse students. So you need to consider what learning style would apply to them learners that you have got. You need to make sure you are catering for every learner. So you may be a kinesthetic learner, it may be an auditory learner, it may be learners with difficulties that you need to identify at the start. Foster critical thinking and problem solving. So include objectives that promote higher order thinking skills, such as critical thinking skill, problem solving skill, you know, analytical skills. Make sure they're able to research as well. Review and refine. So after identifying the learning objectives, make sure they are achievable, and make sure if there are any changes that are needed, make sure you are making the changes as you're going across, because that identifies that you are, you know, ensuring that you are aligned with the curriculum activities and you are achieving them by a certain time frame. Document and communicate learning objectives. Clearly document the learning objectives in and the outcomes in the documentation and the course materials, that both instructors and students understand the whole purpose of the course, why the course is being designed, what the learning objectives, and they understand that as well. So it's really important. Continuous improvement. So regularly review your curriculum, regularly develop it and give feedback based on any sort of changing needs, any sort of curriculum development. The process is changing every day, so you need to be making sure that you are looking at the changes in the curriculum and continuous improvement every term. So in conclusion to 2.1, by following these steps, you can identify clear and effective learning objectives and outcomes will guide the curriculum design and help students achieve the desired outcome. So you need to be identifying what the curriculum designs are, why they're so important, why learning objectives are so important, learning outcomes, for creating the course. You need to ask, there are specific questions that instructors want their course to raise. Learning outcomes can answer that. It might be better if you think differences. Learning objectives are usually viewed by instructors' perspective. So the learning objectives describe what a student will learn in the particular course, and that will be identified through the curriculum. So you need to make sure you're on board with that as well. So 2.2, develop a curriculum for an education and training program. So curriculum development entails the planning, implementation, and evaluation of educational programs and courses. Ensuring effective teaching and learning involves establishing learning objectives, selecting topics, determining instructional methods, and evaluating student outcomes. So firstly, there are some key steps to develop a curriculum. Define the program goals and objectives. So clearly articulate the specific learning objectives of the education and what you want to participate at the end of it. So make sure that, you have a strategy in place that identifies your goals and objectives. Conduct a needs assessment. Identify the needs of the audience, and the audience is the students, making sure if there's any gaps that you tailor the curriculum around that, making sure that you've completed them gaps and you are meeting the needs of the learners. So it's so important that you are able to identify and meet the needs of all learners. So you conduct a needs assessment for this. You need to select content and topics. So determine the content and topics. So make sure that you are determining what content you will be and what topics you will be doing, and make sure they are covered in the learning objectives, and make sure you're considering them in regards to if you have any supplementary material to use. Make sure you are assessing the needs and what the needs are of the individual, and make sure that you are creating this plan that you have the right topics and the units in place. Create curriculum framework. So you need to develop an outline framework for the curriculum. Make sure you are including the modules, the units, the duration of the units, what the pre-requirements are, and what is expected on the framework. Design learning activities and assessment. Again, looking at learning activities, you need to make sure that you are developing a program that is able to have assessment methods that are varied. You need to make sure there are things like, you have lectures, discussions, quizzes, role plays, and exams, and make sure you are using that as a real life application. Ensure alignment with learning outcomes. So when you're designing a curriculum, you need to make sure that the learning outcomes, that every component of that has a learning outcome and has objectives and is aligned with that, and making sure that, the curriculum will be effective in line with the learning outcomes. Consider pedagogical approaches. Determine the pedagogical approaches that will be used, such as active learning, experiential learning, flipped classroom, or problem-based learning. Choose the one that will suit your learners' needs. You need to make sure that you are taking into account all the time when you are doing this curriculum, that you are taking into account the learners' needs and wants. Select resources and materials. Make sure you have resources, technology in place which will support the curriculum. Ensure they're accessible to the learners as well. The learners need to have these materials in place so that when you put in a curriculum together, you have resources in place that the learner could use, IT resources, it could be any other resources as well. You need to make sure that they are able to get to them resources and have access to them. Incorporate technology, again, looking at technology such as learning management system, LMS, which is an outline platforms and multimedia to enhance any sort of learning experience. Make sure you are looking at that and making sure that you are identifying that, okay, and making sure that you're developing that learners will have use to technology. Plan for assessment and feedback, so develop a clear plan. It's really important that you have a plan together, which is a timely plan, and making sure that constructive feedback is given, and also, you know, that the assessments that you have in regards to assessing the learners are valid and reliable. Another really important factor is addressing inclusivity and diversity, and that's really important because every learner is from different diverse areas. So you need to make sure that you are assessing the learners and making sure that you have strategies in place that are inclusive. And, you know, that could be things like, you know, offering learners that have disability, alternative learning paths, and promoting diversity and equality within the classroom, because you need to make sure that you are providing and catering for every learner that is in place and not moving away from that if you have inclusive learning. So the next one is to look at outlining a schedule and timeline. Create a detailed schedule for the unit and make sure you have everything covered, assessment dates, and it has to be a timeline that's achievable and realistic. So you need to make sure that what you are putting in place is realistic and timely for the individual. Develop instructor resources. So if instructors will be involved, provide resources, guidelines and training to effectively deliver the curriculum. So the next one is pilot the curriculum. Before implementing the curriculum, conduct a pilot test with a small group of participants to identify any issues or improvement. If there are any changes to be made, this is the time to do it. So you can pilot the curriculum, and if there's any identification of any improvements that need to be made or any changes that need to be, this is where you would be able to review and revise it as well, and make sure that it's effective and you've taken on board the feedback. And, you know, this will be done continuously throughout the curriculum to identify the effectiveness and, you know, and make sure that changes are put into place based on the feedback that has been given but in the pilot when the curriculum has been piloted. So you need to, this will be done throughout, and it's good to have this in place so that, you know, if any changes need to be made in place, they would be put in place straight away. Document the curriculum, so create comprehensive curriculum that includes an overview, learning objectives, module units, learning assessment. It could have assessment criteria, and it should have a guide for everyone to read as well. So make sure that you create a comprehensive and a detailed curriculum that is able to identify elements of the assessment that they have to do, what learning outcomes they have to meet for each unit, what resources are available, what learning materials are available. And then also implementation and evaluation. So launch the program and continuously evaluate its effectiveness. Like I said, you need to make sure that you are continuously evaluating whether the curriculum is working. You're collecting feedback from participants and making adjustments as you're going along. So in conclusion to 2.2, developing a curriculum is an ongoing process that requires flexibility and adaptability to meet the changing needs of learners and the evolving educational landscape. Keep in mind that curriculum should be designed to support learners in achieving their intended learning outcomes. So make sure that, you know, when you are developing the curriculum, you are reviewing it all the time. If there's any changes that need to be made, you are putting the changes in place and meeting the needs of the learners. You know, that's the most important thing. That phrase is really important when it comes to trying to identify and meet the needs of different learners. So now we're going to go on to 2.3, which is to plan assessment approaches to meet the learning outcomes of curriculum following the necessary guidelines. So planning assessment approaches to meet learning outcomes of a curriculum is crucial in ensuring that curriculum is effective and that learners achieve their intended goals. Assessment methods should align with the curriculum's objectives of being fair, valid, and reliable. And there's some elements that we need to look at in regards to following the assessment. So assessment of learning refers to methods used to verify student knowledge in order to ascertain whether or not they have attained the goals of their individualized programs or the outcomes of the curriculum, to issue credentials and guide decisions about the students' future programs. Diagnostic assessments, formative assessments, summative assessments are just a few of the many assessments that may be used to assist students and teachers to achieve curriculum-based learning goals. It's also been observed and discovered that assessment method must be connected with the learning outcomes in order to be considered as an outcome-based assessment. So to review learning outcomes, by first revisiting the learning outcomes specified in the curriculum, these will guide your assessment planning. So select appropriate assessment methods. So, student learning styles vary widely. So, we need to maintain that when we're looking at the assessment methods. And their strengths and challenges with respect to assessments also vary. Instructors need to consider that variation as they choose assessments for their course. By varying the way we assess student understanding, we are more likely to offer opportunities for every student to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding. This can be accomplished by creating courses with 3 or more forms of assessment. For example, it could be things like class projects and exams. This can be accomplished by offering choices of how to be assessed as well sometimes. For example, giving students the option of writing a paper or taking an exam for a unit of instruction, as long as by the end of the course they have done both forms of assessment. This might be accomplished by offering multiple questions and having students choose which they want to do. So, consider the assessment. So identify the different more suitable assessments to measure the achievement and learning outcomes. Some of the learning assessments that are listed on there are things like, written assessments. It may be exams and quizzes or essays, like I mentioned. It may be performance assessments, for example, presentations, practical exams, projects. It could be observations, maybe clinical assessments, teaching demonstrations. It could be portfolios or e-portfolios. It could be self-assessments and peer assessments. Online assessments is another one. For example, it could be online quizzes, discussion boards, discussion forums, self-assessment and peer assessment, another very popular one. Formative assessments could be, for example, quizzes, homework, and summative could be assessments such as, for example, final exams or final assessments. When we design an assessment, we have to consider, what we assess is what our students study. So, engage with and explore in more depth by beginning with what we want our students to know, what we will be able to do. We can design and choose assessments to demonstrate the appropriate knowledge and skills we are aiming for them to learn. After choosing student learning outcomes, it's important to make a grid that places learning outcomes across one axis and the assessment that demonstrates their achievement of those outcomes on another. In this way, members will be able to check what their students are learning and then identify that through the assessments. Again, aligning assessment with learning outcomes, that's really important when we look at aligning assessments with learning outcomes, because we need to make sure, as I've just mentioned, that the assessments that are put in place are aligning with the learning objectives that are put in place for that unit, and making sure that we are aligning with that axis where, it's clear how students, will be answering the question, or, making sure that they know what they are able to do. Diversify assessment types. So incorporate, as we said, a variety of assessment types, different to assess cognitive levels and skills. For example, use more formative and summative assessments, as well as assessments that target different aspects of knowledge and application, critical thinking. Use things that will measure the students' learning as well. Design clear assessment criteria. So define clear and specific assessment criteria, or rubrics for each assessment. So it outlines what the criteria is so the learner is able to understand that and the level. Address inclusivity and accessibility, and that is again really important when it comes to identifying any sort of methods of assessment. You need to be inclusive, and because every learner is different, and those that have disabilities need to be catered for as well. Consider timing and schedule. Make sure you plan when assessments will take place. Make sure they're aligned with the schedule of the curriculum, and make sure that you have put in place assessment to allow for adequate preparations. Provide adequate resources. So when it comes to assessment, you need to make sure that learners have access to all the resources and materials. If they do not have access, then it will be difficult for them to complete the assessment. So make sure they have materials, resources in place, and they have access to technology, because that's really important. If it's an online exam, they don't have access to any computers. You need to make sure they've got access to computers in place so that they are able to, do the assessment around that. Prevent any sort of plagiarism and cheating. So implement policies and practices in place to prevent plagiarism and cheating. And this may include using things like Turnitin software, detection, AI detection, creating open book exams or monitoring assessments in person or online would try to prevent any sort of plagiarism. Make sure that if you do an exam, make sure it's open book so that the learner is able to use that to help them complete the exam as well. Training for instructors. If instructors are involved in assessment, provide them guidelines for training, put policies in place, how to administer grades, how to mark, how to make sure that their assessment marking is measuring the students' understanding as well, and that is fair and consistent. Communicate assessment expectations. So throughout, whilst you're teaching, make sure you are clearly communicating assessment expectations to learners, and making sure that you are including things like how you'd expect it to be formatted. Make sure they understand what their learning outcomes are. Make sure they understand what they are doing when doing the assessment, and identify instructions for them so that they're able to follow the instruction. And there may be specific instructions for different units that they need to follow, so it needs to be clearly communicated to the learners. Monitor and adjust as needed. So continuously monitor the effectiveness of assessment methods. Collect feedback from learners and instructors, and be prepared to make adjustments based on the feedback. So again, looking at making adjustments, revising assessments in regards to the feedback given, to modify any sort of assessments around the feedback you've given, making sure you are monitoring them and adjusting them to the needs of the learners. Ensure ethical assessment practices. So ensure that practices adhere to ethical guidelines and principles and policies that are put in place. Respect learners' rights and confidentiality, and maintain the integrity of the assessment process. Make sure you are, respecting the integrity of the assessment process and taking on board all the principles and policies in place. So document assessment procedures. So, it's really important that you make sure you have data in place, that you document the procedures that are clear and accessible, and make sure they are available both to the learners and the instructors as well, assessors in this case. Evaluate and the curriculum and assessment regularly. Evaluate the assessment, and also make sure that you are making sure that the teaching or the effectiveness of the assessments are there to measure the students' understanding. Make sure you have assessments, modify assessments and instructions leading up to better student learning. So you are making improvements all the time. So in conclusion to 2.3, by following these steps and ensure assessment approaches align with learning outcomes of the curriculum, you can create a fair and effective system that supports student learning and achievement. Any sort of, the more students, that can move toward deep understanding, the effective, the assessment would be the best time to, make sure that you are making sure you are analysing and making changes to the assessment procedure in line with the learning outcomes will help the learners achieve more. So you need to make sure that everything is in line with the assessment criteria and the learning outcomes. And if there is changes that need to be made, you need to make them changes so that the assessment procedure, the assessment system that you've put in place is fair and is effective. And, learners are able to, make sure they're following that learning outcome as well and achieving in line with the learning outcomes. So the next one to look at in regards to this is learning outcome. Sorry, it's 2.4, which is looking at producing resources to support the curriculum. And this is really important when it comes to curriculum design or anything. Curricular resources include the different kinds of material, be it digital or physical, that teachers use for their teaching, textbooks, lesson plans, and have a significant influence on the students' opportunity to learn. A teaching resource can take many different forms and will mean slightly different things to every teacher, parent, and child. But the basic definition of is simple. A teaching resource is a material that is designed to help facilitate learning and knowledge and acquisition. Learning resources are tools in education, which includes things like maybe videos, flip charts, whiteboards, overhead projectors, PowerPoints, smart devices, and software. The purpose of this is to provide important opportunities for students to explore ideas and knowledge, collaborate, solve problems, and develop their knowledge and skills. So these resources, there's a need to have these in place because they will help support the learner. And producing resources in a curriculum is an essential part of any sort of curriculum development to make sure that these resources are in place for the learners. So firstly, you need to identify resource needs. So determine what resources you would need to support the curriculum and consider the subject matter, learning objectives, and the needs of and preferences of the learner. So all this needs to be taken into account in regards to what kind of software you'll need, why you will need this software, and how it will help the learner. Compile existing resources. So you need to make sure you are putting together existing resources to support the curriculum. This may include textbooks, it may be online materials, it may be articles, it may be other educational contents. Make sure they are put in place so that the learner is able to understand why there's a need for these and why it's a good thing to have a variety of different resources. Create a resource list. So develop a comprehensive list of resources needed for each module or unit in the curriculum, and be specific about the materials required. Make sure that they are meeting the requirements of the learning outcomes. Make sure the learner is able to understand the material and the resources that you put in place and why there's a need to have these resources. And also, you need to identify this for different modules or different units and what the specific materials needs are for that unit, be it, online material, be it articles, be it textbooks. Make sure, you can provide resources such as ebooks for the learners so that they're able to understand why they need to use this for this unit. Make sure it's very clear for the learner. So you've created this resource list. Write content. So if you're creating written materials, lecture notes, handouts with the content, make sure that they align with the learning objectives. Ensure that it's clear, concise, and engaging. Do not do learning objectives, learning outcomes that don't align with, the materials you put in place. You need to be creating materials that would align with the learning objectives. Make sure if you're using textbooks that they align with the learning objectives and the curriculum. Make sure if you're using other resources that they align with and it's clear and concise for the learner. Design visual materials. So visual materials can be things like PowerPoint slides. Make sure that they are enhance the student engagement and the resources, that you're not just relying on just PowerPoints, you're using visual and materials such as, diagrams, things like that. So because everyone learns differently. Develop multimedia resources. So create multimedia resources such as videos, animations, podcasts, Ensure they have good quality for the learners so that they're able to understand and identify what they need to learn and how they need to learn that. So, so you are making sure that the resources you develop are of a high quality and accessible to all learners. There's no point developing resources if they are not accessible for learners. Ensure accessibility. So make sure all the resources are accessible to a diverse group of learners, including disabilities. So make sure you've got accessible formats in place for images. If you've got students that are blind, you need Braille. You need to make sure that, you've got resources available. Make sure that the text images are learners are able to understand, and make sure that you are taking the needs into account when developing resources. Review and edit. Proofread and edit all, you eliminate any sort of errors, clarity, and enhance. So ensure that language is appropriate for the target audience. Do not put jargon in there. Do not put language that the students that you are doing the curriculum for won't understand. Make sure you've got it's clear for them to understand what you have put in there. Include references and citations, so properly cite, reference any external resources or materials used in your resources to maintain academic integrity and avoid any sort of plagiarism. And this is a big one because, it's really important the learner moves away from any sort of plagiarism or not following the policies in regards to that. So making sure that there are references and, making sure that elements of plagiarism are not adhered to. Adapt for online and blended learning. So if the curriculum is delivered online and blended learning, adapt resources to fit that. Consider things like interactivity, user experience, accessibility. You could do online resources with the learners. Make sure that, if your teaching is online, you are making sure you're adapting to the online teaching for them, making sure that it's interactive, like face-to-face teaching, and make sure that you are involving all the learners so they have this experience. Utilizing open educational resources, so explore availability of other resources online, especially educational resources that can be integrated into the curriculum, and that could be something that's quite cost effective. And it could be available to everyone, especially if it's free, and for some educational materials it is free online. Include practicals, examples and case studies. Make sure you use real life examples, and it will be more engaging for the student and relatable. So incorporate practical examples, case studies, real life examples of scenarios, so that they can relate to more, but also it becomes more engaging and the student is able to identify things from a personal perspective, but something that's real life as well. So it gets it more engaging for the student. Provide practice exercises. Always provide practice exercises in the curriculum, and problem solving allows the learner to apply what they've learned, and it's a valuable skill, so it reinforces any sort of concept. So make sure you provide practice experience exercises within the curriculum so that they're able to look at the problems, allow the learner to identify and apply what they've learned in class. So they'll be able to see if they've met their learning outcomes by identifying the experiences through putting problems in place, providing exercises and working around that, and you'll be, as the assessor, be able to identify if the learner has learnt something through the curriculum, and also through the teaching and reinforcement of that. So create an open educational, which I've said, provide any sort of practice essays, include practice, include examples and case studies, create a resource repository. So organize a resource, have a page on your VLE that would look at all the resources that have been put in place, so it's easily accessible for the learners and the assessors. And it's a dedicated website where they could go on to look at things like that. Consider copyright and licensing, so be aware of any copyright licensing issues, especially when using third-party materials, and ensure that you are complying with laws that are attributed to things like copyright. Make sure you are considering any sort of licensing or copyright when you are using online resources or materials from a third party. You need to also test resources. So before implementing the curriculum, test the resources with a small group of learners to give feedback and make improvements. And again, here we're looking at the curriculum being, improved all the time. And if there's any feedback to be given to make improvements, this is where it will be used. People will test the curriculum all the time and it will change and make improvements to it all the time, which will help because it will be catering towards the learner's needs. So update and revise. So regularly, as I said, we'll be updating and revising the resources to align with any sort of educational standards and practices that need to be put in place. So make sure that we are aligning with that and make sure we are meeting the standards and practices that are put in place, and all the time updating and looking at any changes that need to be put in place. And this could be through, feedback given from learners or anything. Document resource usage guidelines. So clearly document guidelines for instructors and learners regarding how the resources should be used, including any sort of sequencing or best practice. So it's really good in regards to that, for regarding how resources should be used. If there's a need for more resources, this all needs to be documented, but also, what the learners need, what resources they need to do the learning outcomes, and if they need any resources in regard to assessment, this could be all the time updated, revised, and have a resource usage guideline and clearly identifies in instructions for learners, so how to use the resources and what is recommended for best practice as well. So in line with any elements of assessment and resources and things like that, curriculum support resources are tools that help teachers deliver the curriculum, and they can be important because they make the learning engaging. Resources like visual aids, interactive tools, and hands-on materials can capture students' attention, and helping teachers stay up to date as well, is aware of teaching resources and curriculum changes to be able to produce high quality resources. And creating and providing effective resources is essential for any success of your curriculum. These resources should enhance the learning experience, support and achievement, learning outcomes, and cater for the different diverse needs of different learners. A good curriculum plan helps to ensure the students learn the same skills regardless of who taught. So it helps teachers meet students where they are. Teachers can use technology students are already familiar with, so that's a form of resource. When choosing resources, teachers can consider things like, whether it's relevant to the curriculum and the learning goals, as we mentioned, whether it's appropriate, whether the resource is appropriate for the students' learning, and whether it's up to date as well, and whether there's need to have that resource. There are many different types of resources that teachers can use, including online or printed resources, as we mentioned earlier, such as worksheets, lesson plans, videos, digital resources, mobile applications, and software packages. Physical resources can be things like, textbooks, library books, and revision guides. And these are needed when it comes to elements of, curriculum design. Resources are a big part of that and should be considered quite deeply when looking at meeting the learning outcomes and the resources. So these are the references that we've used for the learning outcome to today's session. So you could go onto these, and some of these will be ebooks online as well that you could refer to when looking at your assignment discussion or just having a read around developing curriculum or designing a curriculum. So there's a list there, and there's also another page of references there. Refer to ebooks and books and journals on Moodle for this unit. There's also additional reading for this unit, and further reading I've put in a link there, which is something on core curriculum development and delivery toolkit, and it's really good. The link is there. It's a foundation.co.uk, and it's really good. It looks at the content, how the development is, and what can be used to develop a good curriculum for the learners. So have a read of that, go on to that. It's a PDF document, and it's really interesting because you'll be able to identify how a curriculum is designed and developed, and what tools are used. So We've finished learning outcome 2 now. The next learning outcome is the final learning outcome, which is learning outcome 3. If you have any questions regarding anything on this unit, please email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk, and submission of the assignment is to be done on learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk, and the submission link is there. Assignment submission is after 2 weeks of the completion of the unit and its delivery. So the next part of it is what we'll be doing in regards to the learning outcome 3. And I just want to reiterate what we've just give you a quick summary of what we've done in today's session, so you've got a better idea of what we've done, what we've covered, and then we'll go through learning outcome 3 next. So we've looked at inclusive learning today. Just a summary on technologies to enable inclusive learning. We've looked at theories and models of behaviour. We've also looked at elements of, the fact that we've looked at the resources that need to be used, learning theories, what teaching and learning theories are applied. We've also looked at elements of resources such as, putting a curriculum together, what is required of the curriculum, what steps need to be taken to produce a good curriculum in regards to that, and also looked at elements of, whether developing curriculum and how we would develop that for education and training purposes, and why it's important to be able to plan and have goals and objectives in place when designing a curriculum. So we've looked at elements of developing a curriculum in learning outcome 2, being able to develop a curriculum. The next one we'll be looking at is learning outcome 3. Thank you for attending today's session, and if you have any questions or any queries, please email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Thank you.